Where legends breathe again. Eldmyth. When the sun sets and silence takes the land, something ancient awakens. For centuries, stories of vampires have haunted humanity, beings that walk the line between life and death, feeding on blood to defy time itself. Are they cursed immortals, demonic predators, or reflections of our deepest fears of death, desire, and eternity? From medieval graveyards to royal courts, from whispered folklore to dark legends written in blood. Tonight we uncover the true myth behind the vampire and why some say they are still watching us. From the shadows. The night is not empty. In the silent spaces between the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the wind, a deeper stillness resides, a listening quiet. It is in this sacred dark that our story begins, not with a roar but with a whisper carried on a chill breeze. We speak of a being woven into the very fabric of human fear and fascination, a creature that haunts the borderlands between life and death, desire and dread. Its name is the vampire. Forget for a moment the polished fangs and capes of modern fiction. We journey back to the raw, earthy origins of this myth, to a being born not from glamour, but from the grave's cold soil and the desperate human need to explain the unexplainable. Imagine the deepest Carpathian forest, where moonlight struggles to pierce the ancient canopy, casting the world in a mosaic of silver and pitch. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. You are alone. And then you feel it, a pricking on the neck, a sense of profound, predatory attention focused on you from the impenetrable gloom. The vampire is present. It is the shadow that moves against the wind, the shape glimpsed at the periphery of a flickering candle's light, the cold spot in a room heavy with forgotten memory. This is our starting point, a creature of profound contradiction, both supremely physical and unsettlingly spectral, a corpse that walks and hungers, forever tethered to the world it has supposedly left behind. To understand the vampire is to dig into the grave soil of prehistory. Its roots are not singular, but a tangled web sprouting from every corner of the globe where humanity has contemplated mortality. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Eckamu, a vengeful spirit of the unburied dead, wandered the world bringing sickness and sucking the vitality from the living. The Romans feared the Lamia and the Strix, blood-drinking night creatures. But the vampire, as we conceptually recognize it, the reanimated corpse that sustains its unnatural existence by consuming the life force of the living, found its most fertile ground in the Slavic and Balkan regions of Europe. Here, the soil itself seemed to breed the myth. In remote villages huddled against the endless forests, death was a constant companion, and its mysteries were explained through a grim, pragmatic lens. When a person died suddenly or lived a sinful life, or was unlucky enough to have a cat jump over their coffin, the soul might refuse to depart. The body, buried in the cold earth, would not decay. Instead, it would begin a slow, blasphemous transformation. The skin would darken and tighten like leather. The nails and hair would continue to grow, and beneath the closed lips, the teeth, particularly the canines, would elongate into sharp points. This was not a demon from some external hell, but a homegrown horror, a neighbor returned from the churchyard. This proto-vampire in the grave was called by many names: Virikalakas in Greece, Upir in Russia, Strigo in Romania. Its existence was not a matter of superstition, but of observed reality for these communities. Unexplained livestock deaths, wasting diseases that swept through families, nightmares that suffocated sleepers, all were laid at the feet of the restless dead. The evidence was sought in the earth itself. The folklore prescribed a grim autopsy. Suspected graves would be opened, sometimes years after burial, to inspect the body. A flexible, uncorrupted corpse, perhaps with fresh blood around its mouth, was definitive proof. The community's response was a brutal, symbolic surgery designed to halt the creature's predation. A stake of hawthorn or ash would be driven through the heart, pinning the body to the earth. The head might be severed and placed between the legs. The mouth was sometimes stuffed with garlic or a brick. In extreme cases, the body was dismembered, burned, and the ashes scattered in running water. These were not acts of malice, but of desperate protection, a ritualized rewinding of the unnatural process, a forced return to the stillness of true death. The vampire, therefore, began as a deeply local, communal terror, a manifestation of collective anxiety about disease, social disorder, and the fragile boundary between the community of the living and the solitary exile of the dead. The vampire's habitat was the liminal space, the threshold between worlds. It did not inhabit grand castles but the margins, forest crossroads, abandoned mills, ruined chapels, and of course, the graveyard. It was a creature of the night, but not because sunlight burned it to ash. Early myths simply stated it slept in its grave during the day, its power cresting at the midnight hour. Its movement was described as stiff, sometimes a slow, deliberate walk, other times a gliding motion just above the ground. It could transform, not into a bat but into a wolf, a moth, or a plume of mist to slip under doors or through keyholes. Its primary prey was first and foremost its own family, draining the life from those it once loved through a slow, psychic attrition that manifested as a wasting sickness, consumption, or tuberculosis, whose symptoms mirrored the vampire's attack. The encounter was often intimate and domestic. The victim would report a feeling of pressure on the chest, a suffocating weight, and see a vaporous, shadowy form leaning over them in the dead of night. The vampire's kiss was not a bite on the neck, but a draining of breath and blood, a parasitic transfer of vital essence that left the victim pale, listless, and doomed to soon join the ranks of the undead. Let us now give life, or rather unlife, to a specific tale from the folk tradition. In a remote hamlet in the Serbian mountains, a man named Petar died suddenly after a quarrel with his brother. The burial was swift, but within a month his brother's family fell ill. The livestock grew sickly. At night, the brother's wife awoke to a chilling presence in the room and the unmistakable sound of slow, dragging footsteps on the packed earth floor. The village elders convened. They remembered Petar's temper, his sudden death. Suspicion crystallized. Armed with shovels and stakes, they marched to the churchyard at noon when the vampire's power was weakest. The grave was opened. There lay Petar, but not as they had left him. His body was plump, his cheeks ruddy, his lips stained a dark crimson. His eyes were open, glassy and fixed. When the blacksmith drove the hawthorn stake into his chest, a piercing shriek, unlike any human or animal sound, erupted from the corpse, and a gush of dark, liquid blood soaked the grave clothes. The body was then burned on a pyre of juniper wood, the smoke smelling oddly sweet. The haunting ceased. The family recovered. This story, repeated in countless variations, cemented the vampire's reality. It was a tangible problem with a tangible, if gruesome, solution. The vampire's symbolism is as rich as its mythology. It is, first and foremost, the ultimate transgressive body. It violates the natural order by refusing to decay, blurring the clean line between organic process and stagnant permanence. It represents contagion in its most literal form, a parasitic entity that spreads its condition through intimate contact, mirroring the terror of epidemic disease. Socially, it often embodied the fear of the other, the outsider, or the person who lived outside communal norms, the heretic, the suicide, the unbaptized child. But its hunger points to a deeper, more psychological terror, the fear of consumption, of being used and drained by another, whether through emotional parasitism, oppressive relationships, or the sheer drudgery of life. The vampire is also a dark reflection of desire, its thirst a grotesque parody of lust and longing, an eternal craving that can never be satiated. In a world governed by faith, it was a walking blasphemy, a creature that had escaped divine judgment and carved out its own profane immortality from the suffering of others. It was chaos incarnate, attacking the fundamental units of society, the family, the home, the health of the body itself. As the 18th century dawned, the vampire myth collided with the Age of Enlightenment. Reports of vampirism in places like Serbia and Hungary reached Western Europe, not as folklore, but as sensationalist news. Philosophers and doctors debated the phenomenon. The Habsburg monarchy even sent official commissions to investigate. This period, known as the vampire controversy, saw the creature step out of the peasant graveyard and into the pages of scholarly journals. While rational explanations were sought, the intrigue only grew. The vampire was ripe for literary plucking. The pivotal transformation occurred in 1819 with John Polidori's The Vampire, which introduced the charismatic, aristocratic Lord Ruthven. This was a seismic shift. The vampire was no longer a stinking, bloated peasant corpse, but a nobleman, a seducer, a figure of Gothic romance and diabolical charm. It was a creature of the mind as much as the body, a corrupter of souls. This set the stage for the urtext of the modern vampire, Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula. Stoker fused the folkloric monster with the aristocratic predator, adding new weaknesses, the crucifix, the sanctified host and powers, and rooting him in the exotic, mysterious soil of Transylvania. Count Dracula was a timeless, powerful entity, a dark inversion of the Victorian gentleman, embodying fears of reverse colonization, sexual predation, and the corruption of pure English blood. Dracula cemented the vampire's place in the global imagination, and the 20th century unleashed it upon new mediums. Film gave the vampire a face, first the haunting, rodent-like Count Orlok in Nosferatu, then the suave, tragic elegance of Bela Lugosi. Each generation has remade the vampire in its own image. The rebellious, rock-and-roll sensuality of Anne Rice's Lestat, the brooding, romantic heroes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Twilight, the brutal, animalistic hordes of 30 Days of Night or The Strain. In video games, they are foes and protagonists, complex characters with moral depth. The modern vampire is a canvas for exploring themes of addiction, immortality, otherness, and the nature of humanity itself. Its weaknesses have multiplied: sunlight as fatal fire, the need for invitation, and its powers have expanded: superhuman speed, glamour, flight. But the core paradox remains: a being that is forever alive yet fundamentally dead, a prisoner of its own endless hunger. The folk horror of the peasant corpse has evolved into a potent metaphor for the anxieties of the contemporary age, the fear of pandemics, the allure and danger of eternal youth, the parasitic nature of late capitalism. Yet what of the original myth? Does it still breathe in its native soil? In parts of rural Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece, the old beliefs have not entirely vanished. There are still occasional reports, treated with seriousness by local elders, of restless dead causing misfortune. The practices, though rare, persist: precautionary stakes placed in graves, garlic tucked into coffins. The vampire endures here not as metaphor, but as a living part of a worldview that acknowledges the unseen world as intimately connected to our own. This duality is the creature's greatest strength. It is both a specific folkloric entity with a prescribed method of destruction, and a universal archetype that can be reshaped to fit any culture's deepest fears. It is the monster under the bed and the seducer in the bedroom, the walking plague and the tragic immortal. It is a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting back our terror of death, our fascination with power, our dread of the hungry dark, and our own latent capacity for predation. The vampire is, ultimately, a story we tell ourselves, a dark fairy tale that gives form to the formless anxieties that stir in the midnight hour. As our exploration draws to a close, we are left not with a definitive conclusion but with an enduring mystery. The vampire has slipped from its grave in the Carpathian soil and now walks the endless corridors of the human psyche. It is a shapeshifter, adapting to every era, a parasite on our collective imagination that we willingly, eagerly host. We have dissected its folklore, traced its literary evolution, and analyzed its symbolism. Yet something ineffable remains: the chill that descends when you walk past an old cemetery alone at night, the primal urge to pull the covers a little higher, the uncanny feeling of being watched from a darkened window. The vampire is the embodiment of the what if. What if death is not an end? What if the soul can be corrupted? What if hunger can outlast life itself? In a world increasingly illuminated by science, the vampire is a cherished pocket of shadow, a reminder that not everything can be explained, that mystery still has a claim on us. It is a myth that refuses to die because it speaks to something fundamental and eternal within us. The fear of the other that is also the self, the terror and the allure of the darkness we carry inside. So the next time you feel an unexpected chill or hear a rustle outside your window on a still night, remember the old tales. Look to the shadows between the trees, the empty space at the crossroads. The story is not over. It merely sleeps, waiting for the fall of dusk to rise again. For as long as humanity fears the night, dreams of immortality, and feels the pang of hunger, the vampire will continue to live in our stories, in our art, and perhaps, just perhaps, in the quiet, watching dark. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.